So I'm going to start asking you a question. Who here in this room has never been wrong? Usually I get at least one wiseacre who raises their hand. So why is it so hard to admit that we're wrong? Hi, Margaret.
Hi there.
So the truth is that nobody knows everything about anything, even experts, right? There's more that we don't know than we can know. Can you show the Harari slide, please? Do any of you know Harari? He's a contemporary historian, well-regarded, and he was asked, is there hope for humanity? And he says, humankind can rise to the occasion if we keep our fears under control and be a bit more humble about our views. And my personal story is that I'm already off script, okay, is that I started working on bridging the political divide the day after 2016 election, November 9th, and I woke up with this voice in my head saying, you've got to do something about this political polarization in our country. And it was a joke to me because I was not very political. I just checked the boxes that the party I associated with at that time did, right? Now I'm politically homeless. And what I found is that if we entered too quickly into the issues themselves, we could talk about immigration and say, well, from the left, this is their point of view. From the right, this is point of view. But people would get so triggered, it was worse than not doing anything. They would just double down, leave, get pissed off. And there's a lot of reasons that I'll get into in the class in a little bit tonight why we do that as human beings. We're wired that way. So we have to do a lot of manual overrides. So what I figured out, and this is just anecdotally, I didn't do proper study, is that the first step is to have some humility. If we always think that we're right about something, how are we going to let in new information? Somebody might know something that we don't. So that's where we start. So let me tell you a little bit about the class first, and we'll get that over with. I plan to give you some content tonight anyway, so if you don't take the class, it's fine. But in the class, it'll be 2 hours with an hour extra overtime. So it's 2 to 4, Saturday afternoon. But if people want to stay and continue talking about it, we'll stay on an extra hour. There'll be a little bit of homework between the classes, like a TED Talk and maybe an article. And we'll do a lecture. Well, I love to show videos. We'll see some tonight. We'll do some exercises in partners, and then we'll discuss. And so that's a formula I've been using for a long time now, and it seems to be the right amount of time, the right amount of interaction, and right amount of lecture. So the first class, which will start November 5th, will be basically this Cultivating Humility, talking about why we should do that and how hard it is to do. And the second class will talk about what I call our operating systems, our OS, meaning how we're wired. The social scientists have come up with 188 ways that our minds play tricks on us. They're biases they're wired. We just our environment fills in what we're biased for or against. And thirdly, the third class will be about what I call zooming out. And that's once we get humble, a little more relaxed, a little more open-minded, able to take in new information without getting triggered, we can zoom out and understand things on a bigger level. And one might call that expanding consciousness too in certain circles. So, and just a little pitch about why this is good to do is when I took this leap, I had the voice, I jumped in the deep end, and it was probably the first 3 or 4 years the hardest thing I ever did. I got so wobbly with my nervous system, really taking in such new information and learning how to calm myself down. I would get into a bathtub like 3 or 4 times a day sometimes because I'd be so worked up. Now I want to tell you, it's so much better on the other side, not having to have an opinion about every little thing, not having to agree with a tribe for fear that I'd get thrown out, and all kinds of other things. So it's the kind of thing, and maybe you've had this in your life, if I'd known how hard it was going to be, I would never have said yes. But I've got chills now. I am so happy I said yes. If nothing else, this is personal enrichment, you know, and I feel like I do have a more expanded consciousness to be able to take in more things. So the structure of this evening is I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A or discussion. And we can go, I planned for an hour, but if we go over, that's fine too. So I want to start us with a video. It's called The Joy of Being Wrong, and it's by the Templeton Foundation, for those of you who know them.
We've all been in arguments. And it wouldn't be an argument if you didn't believe that you were right and they were wrong. But aren't we all wrong sometimes? No one is right about all the things all the time. Research shows that admitting that we might be wrong can actually help us be better friends, happier people, and more effective advocates for our beliefs. This is called intellectual humility, and it's a gift. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you can give yourself. So why don't we? Why is it so hard to admit that we might be wrong? In our minds, our ideas, assumptions, and experiences weave together to form our picture of the world. So you can see why it's painful to admit that something we believe in is wrong. One tug on the thread and it can feel like our whole sense of self is unraveling. In fact, studies show that our brains actually react to attacks on our beliefs the same way as threats to our physical well-being. Our natural human tendency is to avoid those threats, surround ourselves with people who think just like us. It doesn't matter how smart or well-educated you are, anyone can fall into these traps. But we can break out of these bubbles. Our ideas don't need to limit us. We just need to remember that some of the things we know are wrong or incomplete. It doesn't have to feel like a failure. It can feel like a relief. We can let go of the ideas that were holding us back from growth. This is one of the key features of intellectual humility, that willingness to accept and admit that you might be wrong. Early research shows that people who practice intellectual humility make more thoughtful decisions, have stronger connections with their friends and partners, and are more tolerant, which could lead to a happier life. We live in a time where there's pressure to appear like you're always right. But recognizing an incompleteness in our knowledge isn't weakness or ignorance. It's the opposite. It turns every day into an opportunity to learn and grow. In fact, people who practice intellectual humility are shown to be better at recognizing persuasive arguments. That means you could be a more effective advocate for your beliefs by allowing them to be challenged. The scientific method asks us to test every idea, question every theory, and that discipline is responsible for much of the explosive progress that has defined the last 2 centuries. Intellectual humility is the same principle applied to the individual, constantly refining your understanding of the world and yourself. The person you are now only exists because the person you were was willing to grow into something new. Intellectual humility is that willingness. It allows us to constantly search through our understanding of the world and bit by bit, make it better. Learn more about research on intellectual humility at templeton.org/discoveries.
So I want to start
We've all been
with a definition of humility. So from the dictionary, there's 2 definitions. One is the state or character of being humble, freedom from pride and arrogance, and 2, lowliness of mind, a low estimate of oneself, self-abasement, and meekness. But I see it differently. These are the definitions I like. Acknowledging and owning both my strengths and my limitations without either self-inflation, arrogance, or grandiosity, or self-deprecation and false modesty. So in other words, it's moving towards a more accurate self-assessment. You know, that's not so judgy about myself. The other The other definition that I took from one of my teachers, which I really love, is nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to defend. Now, I'm not there all the time or even a majority of the time, but I know when I'm in it, and it feels very relaxing and very authentic. It's a way of being more comfortable with our humanness. St. Augustine said, "I err, therefore I'm human." We all make mistakes, but it is hard. I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why it's so hard to feel like we've made a mistake. I want to show a clip now. I want to show a clip from the movie
We've all been in
12
arguments.
Angry Men.
And it wouldn't be an argument.
No. Has anyone seen 12 Angry Men, the old movie? I love this movie. It's really worth a watch. And it really nails all like biases, critical thinking, assumptions, prejudice. This clip I'm going to show, it's like a minute of Henry Fonda, who's juror number 8, who is responding. He's the only juror who's going against the others. The 11 others think this young boy's guilty. And Henry Fonda is saying, wait a minute, we should talk about this. And the way that he holds himself, for me, is a real role model. We'll see what you think.
Julie loses the jury. Let's begin with the first characteristic of expressing uncertainty. The very first exchange between these two men happens when number 3 asks number 8 a simple question.
You really think he's innocent? I don't know.
When number 10 asks him a question, he gets a similar answer.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story?
I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
Shortly thereafter, number 10 asks him another question and gets another similar answer.
What are we sitting here for?
I don't know. Maybe no reason.
So I look for role models. Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird is another one. But I think, sometimes I kind of try and channel these people. Like, what would they do in this situation? And it's really helpful. It's really helpful to find the role models in your life or in media to help us grow. This idea that I could be wrong. So why should we do this? Why should we cultivate humility? We're already seeing that maybe it's a little hard to do. Well, I've already covered one thing, this personal enrichment, knowing thyself, raising consciousness. And humility is its own reward, actually, once you're there. And it's a way of coming less from ego, developing a more open mind, and becoming more relaxed and homeostatic. Now, I'm going to talk about in the class and tonight more about homeostasis. Homeostasis is this biological sense where everything's okay, relaxed, equanimous. Some people get it through meditation. There's all kinds of different ways people use mindfulness. But like Harari said in the quote, we need to calm down. We need to calm down a little bit. And being humble helps us to do that, and being calm helps us to be humble. Another reason to cultivate humility is for better relationships. So family, spouses, work, organizations, your spiritual or religious community. Anything that can happen on the political realm can happen on one-to-one, right? It's all the same dynamic. It's just ratcheted way up in the macro. Other reasons are spiritual or religious. So through a spiritual lens, people might say, we are all one. Through a religious lens, people might say, we are all God's children. To me, those sentences are the same. The golden rule is part of being able to be humble. Another very important reason to cultivate humility is to actually build bridges. Again, it could be in the workplace, could be in politics, but we need that to start solving problems, to break gridlocks. It's a pragmatic approach. So what I'm seeing now, because I'm following, there are a number of bridging organizations or depolarizing organizations in the US now. And what I'm seeing is a wave now of people who are motivated now by, we just have to start getting things done, right? So there's a whole pragmatism But you can't do that if you're seeing the other side as the enemy. So what gets in the way of humility? And my approach has always been the kind of looking at obstacles about things versus just aspirations. So I could say to you, oh, let's try to be humble, let's aspire to this. But I think we get a lot more bang for our buck by seeing, well, what gets in the way of me being humble? And I've just seen it with my own personal growth, and some of you have known me for a while. It's always been more fruitful to me to find out, I've got this hang up here. What's getting into the way of me getting over it versus trying to be different? Do you see what I'm getting at? So that's my approach. So in class number 1, we'll talk about, like I said, humility and what gets in the way. So we touched on a little bit in these 2 clips, defense against uncertainty and not knowing. If I feel like I'm right all the time and I'm certain and I think that I understand everything and can have a really absolutely true opinion, I'm defended against uncertainty and unknowing. Alan Watts wrote a great book called The Illusion of Certainty, which I highlighted the whole book. It was ridiculous, but it's like part of this process of cultivating humility is being okay with not knowing, not being sure. And I think the ways that at least I have sought feeling grounded and centered by thinking I knew something has been replaced with a more organic, like, I don't really know. Like most of the time now about opinions, I really find that I don't know enough about most things to have an opinion about them. And that's what I say. So, and it's very relaxing. I'll tell you, it's good for my homeostasis. When I was first doing this work, and part of the thing is I was reading and being exposed to ideas that were opposite from where I thought I was. And sometimes just a headline would make me shake. That's the hot bath thing. And like they said in the first clip, they've done brain scans where opposing ideas can be processed, felt as physical threats. So this flight, fight, and freeze is, really can come up with this. This is some of the ways we have to know ourselves. So I would get really what I called wobbly. And like in the first clip too, he said, your whole sense of self can be put in question. And that's when I understand where I came and where I am, I understand how strong that defense had to be. Because it's not pleasant to feel that, but it is the way to be liberated from all kinds of things, not just politics, personality and all that. One of the feelings I had, well, if I was wrong about this, what if I was wrong about every single thing I believed? And it didn't come out to be true. I learned to live with this other way of being. And part of that was learning to regulate my nervous system, to self-regulate. People say, and I think this is true, that the growth zone is the discomfort zone. And in therapy, for those of you who've been in it, sometimes that's when you're breaking through to something new, it's very uncomfortable. So part of the deal is to learn to tolerate discomfort. And let's face it feels better to think and feel that we know the absolute truth. It makes us feel less powerless. And some people think that powerlessness is one of the worst emotions we can have. I'm not sure if it is the worst, but it's one of them. So we'll do all kinds of things not to feel powerless in our relationships, at work, everywhere. Now, a big one, and we could do a whole week workshop on this one, is shame. So I have a couple stories of my own, of my adventures in shame. And the first story is that I was roommates with a man named Joe when I was in my mid-20s, and he was studying to be a psychoanalyst. And he would come home at night and tell me all the things he'd been learning, and I loved hearing his stories. And one day he said, I'm finding out that for most people, shame is at the root of their problems, their hang-ups. And I'm thinking, that's so funny. I don't feel any shame. How about that? In about 10 years, something happened. I don't know what it was, but it was like, oh my God, I had no idea. so much shame. And then after that, a real breakthrough came, maybe at about 10 years after that. My youngest son, Max, came to me at 9:30 at night and said, "Oh, I forgot I have this math homework." And I said, "Okay, let's sit down and do it." And it was one of those math problems, maybe word problems, where there's like 20 facts and you have to figure out which ones don't suit the equation you're solving for. And Max is struggling. He was 9. And I started yelling at him. I said, "Max, what's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah." And I caught myself. And I thought, oh my God, it's me who can't figure it out. It's me who can't figure out which of those 20 facts we need. And I stopped myself and I said, let's take 10 minutes. I got into the shower, real hot shower, and I keened. Like this noise came out of me that I thought, holy cow, what is this? And I didn't have a memory associated like being shamed as a kid, but obviously there was a strong felt sense. I came out, I said, "Max, I'm really sorry, it was me who didn't know. Let's go to sleep and wake up 15 minutes early and we'll do it." But that was really the first, so he's 30 now, so 20 years ago. But it's always in process. But that's what we do too, right? When we have these bad feelings, we often project them on other people. Like, I'm not the idiot, right? Ugh, yeah, there's more stories there, but that'll be in the class. You have to pay for that. One of the problems with shame too is that it's shameful to admit that you're shamed, right? So it's like this meta thing. Okay, so in our second class, we're going to talk more about our wiring and our nervous system. So what I've called our operating system. So we have to realize and remember that we are wired for survival. And so some of the things we're reacting to, in the early days, I had to remind myself when I got triggered, there's no one here has a knife to my throat. Like I'm not in serious physical danger. And it was that opposing idea thing. And I even had a conversation early on with somebody after the 2016 election who had voted differently than me. And she was trying to convince me about her vote. And she said, "Why do I feel like it's life or death that you believe me?" And I didn't understand it then, but now I understand it, because we have to start delaminating our survival reactions to our behaviors, because it's not reality. There's not a saber-toothed tiger chasing us on the savannah. You know, we need to really calm down. So we'll talk about that. Oh, there's a couple quotes I really like. "The problem is your body can't tell the difference between a viewpoint threat and a bear." And when we get that way, we can't think, right? When we're triggered, we cannot think with our prefrontal cortex. So that's why, people do crazy things when they're panicking, because they can't think. And then the writer, journalist Chris Mooney said, "We apply flight or fight responses not only to predators, but to data itself." That really struck me so even reading raw data, you can be triggered, but not after you take my class.
There's the pitch.
Huh?
There's the pitch.
There's the pitch. Had to do it. But you're going to come away with something anyway. One of the things that they talk about, a term I picked up in the depolarization world, is something called priors. And priors is like the basket of all the things we bring to it. It could be our personal history. I really like this word. It biases, assumptions, prejudice, conditioning, childhood stuff, trauma. It's all the things we're bringing to. So this is one of the things with understanding ourselves and getting more humble. We have a clearer lens. I'm not, or if we're having some interaction and I get a little triggered, I go, okay, I know I'm being triggered. I'm going to actually get some fresh air, have a cup of tea, and come back. And then I can start seeing more clearly what's really going on. I'm not imposing my filters all the time. And I'm not looking for danger all the time. That's another thing. We have a negativity bias. We're scanning for who's safe, who's not safe. But some of that is maladaptive now. The other things we'll talk about is being triggered. Defense mechanisms are really, really huge to understand our personal defense mechanisms. And the other thing we'll talk about is group affiliations and identification and groupthink, what they call them tribal identities. And this is another thing that we're very, that is tied to survival. Belonging equals survival. And it's really complicated. When I read other people in the bridging and the depolarization world, they think that this is kind of the number one driver, especially with the way people are clumping in groups and canceling other groups. And it's really important. And Brene Brown, do you know Brene Brown? Did anybody read Braving the Wilderness? I didn't know it when I picked it up, but it's all about bridging the divide. And one of the things she said is we need to learn to leave our ideological bunkers and belong to ourselves. I mean, I've got chills as I say it, to really stand firm, even if no one else around us is thinking the same way. And I've had some of those experiences, which have been really liberating once I got, I remember certain times where in this work I would feel frightened, and I would wake up in the night and I'd think, oh my God, I'm going to lose the house. I'm going to lose the house. And just like a panic attack. And it didn't make sense because I wasn't making money off these things. Most of the things I've done the last 5 years, I haven't made money at. And there's no shop to boycott or anything like that. And I just had to really keep on bringing myself back to, no, the house is separate from all. I'm not going to lose the house. I don't have a job I can even get fired from. So, I was glad it was something so absurd, because if it gets a little closer to reality, then, it's harder to parse out, right? But it was like, I'm fine. But those are the things in that discomfort zone, by working through some of the stuff that comes out for us, is the way to get through it. And all of these things, these 188 ways our mind plays tricks on us, our triggered reactions, our group affiliation, our defenses, all of these things are wired. So we're actually going against our own biology when we start to work on this stuff. It's a huge deal. So our nervous systems get really confused. So we're purposely saying, okay, I'm gonna bring myself to these uncomfortable places so that I can really grow and learn and expand. So here's another clip. I want to say a word first. It's from, has anybody here heard of the Heterodox Academy or Jonathan Haidt? No. Okay, so this was a man, Jonathan Haidt, wrote a book in 2008 called The Righteous Mind, and he's really well regarded. He did a lot of studies in different countries also about the kind of ideas between liberal and conservative points of view. He's a very important bridger. And he started this organization on campuses called the Heterodox Academy, because he was finding way too much left lean in universities, higher education, more of the elite. And so he really has been a big spokesperson for viewpoint diversity. Now, diversity right now, and for a while now, is a huge word, right? But not so much viewpoint diversity. That's not really celebrated. So this clip, it's 3 or 4 minutes, it focuses on college, but it applies to everything. Thanks, Ray.
What is reason? Philosophers have long told us it is humanity's highest and noblest attribute. It's what separates us from other animals. It's what allows us to separate truth from falsehood. There's just one problem. When psychologists study real people trying to reason, what they find is that reason has a gigantic, crippling flaw. It's called the confirmation bias. People don't use their reasoning abilities to find the truth. They use reason to confirm the views that they already hold. Now put people into teams where everyone holds the same beliefs, and the confirmation bias grows into a collective mania. Everyone helps everyone else find reasons why their side is right, further deepening shared bonds. Heaven help any individual who thinks for herself or who looks for evidence on the other side. Such people are called traitors, and groups have many ways of shutting them up. When everyone's beliefs line up, and when dissenters are punished, that's the definition of orthodoxy. Orthodoxy can be great if you're heading into battle and you want everyone marching in lockstep. But what if your goal is truth rather than victory? What if you actually wanted to help students overcome their confirmation bias and learn about the perspectives of others? What if you wanted to create a community of researchers who could actually study and solve social problems? In other words, what if you wanted to create a university? Would you want orthodoxy? Or would you want its opposite, heterodoxy, where multiple views are not just permitted but encouraged? In a heterodox university, each person can still use their reasoning powers to find reasons why they are right and others are wrong. But here's the brilliant thing. Each person becomes the solution to someone else's confirmation bias. This is why universities must have viewpoint diversity. Viewpoint diversity is the only reliable way to get around confirmation bias. Viewpoint diversity is the secret to a great education. It may not always be comfortable, but when ideas collide, we learn, we grow together. Everyone gets smarter. The alternative? Campuses that try to protect students from unapproved ideas, books, and speakers. A politically orthodox university discourages dissent, creativity, empathy, and truthfulness. That's why more than 1,000 academics from across the political spectrum have joined Heterodox Academy. Working with students, professors, and administrators, Heterodox Academy is rebuilding the culture of free inquiry and open, civil debate that turns universities into engines of discovery, growth, and progress. Support free inquiry. Share your voice. Stand up for viewpoint diversity. Visit heterodoxacademy.org.
So, and that brings us very nicely into our third class, which will be about zooming out. So we'll have explored humility, understanding our operating systems, and then we can more truly take in viewpoint diversity, right? And it ultimately gets us to understand the bigger picture. Somebody might say grokking, if you know that term from Stranger in a Strange Land. But why should we zoom out? Why should we bother with all this? Well, the problem also now with media, politicians, social media are echo chambers. And I have news sources that are both left and right leaning, and sometimes I'll just spot check and I'll say, wonder what the left is saying about this story on the right and vice versa. If there's any kind of controversy about it, often the other side it's not even in, like the New York Times or the Washington Post, and vice versa. So I don't do it on everything because I don't have that much time or bandwidth, but we have to understand the different sides are actually literally getting different news, right? And so how can we come to any, and there's another thing, it's not in my notes, but it was a study done, the Hidden Tribes study in 2018 showed that it's only about 15% of the extremes of right and left that are the polarizing ones. Most people are purple than red or blue. They lean a little more conservative on some things, a little more liberal on others. It's really being driven by a minority of people, this polarization. And then the next year, the same group did something called the perception gap. And what they did is they asked different people on different sides questions about how extreme they thought the views of the other side were. And they had 5 questions, like on immigration, gun, police, like hot button topics. And most of the aggregate side was like about 30% of each side were extreme in their views, like say open and closed borders. But no, wait a minute, now I'm inversing it. I'm getting math dyslexia. People thought that people were more polarized on the other side than they actually were. So some of what we're reacting to with this reactivity is not even about what's really going on, right? We've misperceived. And then what really gets me is, and I found myself, I learned from my own experience when I would take strong, moral, kind of intractable stances, kind of sacred cows, about things I didn't know about. Or I had formed an opinion 20 years ago, but I never upgraded. I never got the upgrade. And so that was very humiliating. And then that moved to humbling, and then liberation. So we need to zoom out to understand really what's going on. I don't like to use the word truth or reality anymore because they've been tainted. So I just say what's going on, so we can understand what's going on. We really need to widen our aperture. And some of you know the story about the blind man and the elephant. They were asked to describe the elephant. They each took apart the tail, the trunk, the ears. They all described it differently. We are all the blind men, people. And the only edge we can have on that is to know that we are. Because we'll never, I have a good story from my husband at the time. He was really good about ethical decisions. And sometimes I'd have these problems and I'd say, okay, I have this issue with so-and-so and I could do A, B, or C. And he said, well, what about D or E? And those D and E's, I never occurred to me. We need, like this video shows, we need other people to show us our blind spots. Otherwise, and if we stay in our echo chambers and with like-minded people, or people, like I've found in my classes over time, that people would say, oh my gosh, I'm actually more purple, but I'm afraid to say so in front of my friends. It's legitimate. I've seen terrible things. We can, by zooming out, we solve problems better. There's two things I want to talk about, and these are two of my favorite topics, but I just want to touch on them. Have you guys heard of wicked problems? They're not evil problems. It's a thing. And wicked problems, there's like 10 tenets about them that I don't know by heart. But they are things like there's never a solution. They're very thorny and they're very nested. So you can never, and they are so interrelated with different things. So you could solve for this problem here, but then it either creates or makes this other problem here worse, because there's so many things that are interrelated. I just learned about this 2 years ago, and it changed my life, because I thought, these simple solutions, throw money at this, create this policy, you gotta zoom way out. You gotta zoom way out. The other thing about these wicked problems is trial and error doesn't work like it can with simple problems. They call them tame problems. So for instance, you've got, I don't want to mention an issue because people go crazy. That's later. But, we may decide on a problem solving on a large scale, and we devote our money and time and energy, and 5 years down the line, we go, didn't work out so well. You can't go back. Go ahead.
Do you have an example of a wicked problem in current?
Well, I don't want this to start a rabbit hole, okay? But it's something like climate change, okay? But, and the zooming out on that is really, so you get the people that feel convinced that this one thing is going to solve it. But if we just did that one thing and 5 years, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. But we need all kinds of stakeholders and all different points of view to, like science, like to push on it. Like, what would happen if we did this? To question, to be skeptical, instead of thinking there's a magic bullet. Wicked problems, there's no magic bullets. It's not changing a light bulb. But is that good for now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And there's always trade-offs. I didn't understand this either. So much I didn't understand that for any solution of these big problems, there's always a trade-off. no magic solution, no perfect solutions, and it has to be weighed as best we can. The other thing is, with this viewpoint diversity and zooming out, it can be a check for unintended consequences, right? There's always going to be, because we can't go far enough in the future with all these variables to figure out anything that could happen. But the more people you have pushing on these ideas, you can avoid some of the unintended consequences. There was a story that was very revealing to me. A friend of mine's daughter worked for an NGO in one of the African countries, and they were going to put clean water there, a water system. And I don't know how far they got with this project, but they were into it at some point, and they realized that the women who were the water carriers, who took the water from the river to the village, they were protected from rape. Who knew? We, especially being in a different culture, that probably wasn't even on the checklist, right? So that's why we need so many points of view. And if we think we're right, and if we think, well, that side has that idea, so they must be wrong, we're not going to listen, la, la, la. It's not the way to go forward, in my view. There's this, any of you know who Dan Ariely is? There's a fabulous documentary he did called The Dishonesty Project. He's a researcher at Stanford, very charming. And he calls, I don't know if this was a joke or it's true, but he called his organization the Center for Advanced Hindsight. I thought, I want that. I want to have that. But I think we can have some of this if we're more open and we're zooming out, we're curious, that kind of thing. So I think you're getting the picture. Like, if I need to be right, if I can't be humble, and my operating systems are inhibiting my capacity to see the bigger picture, my biases, my nervous system, all that, I won't be able to zoom out. And therefore, I won't even be able to have a chance of understanding. And that's the other thing that I'll talk about at length, is when we're listening, not to be in rebuttal mode. Like, if I'm talking to you and you have a different point of view and I keep on thinking, okay, when I have a chance to talk, I'm going to say yes, but, and what about this and what about that? Instead of relaxing and just really being able to take in and to evaluate, to critically think about what you're saying to me, even though it might be new to me, especially if it's new to me. So I can tell you there's a lot of joy to not only being wrong, but to zooming out. So I want to give you just a few takeaways about what you can do. So you can catch yourself in the act, kind of like I did with Max, right? When something happens, you're needing to be right, or you're getting triggered. And Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of the concentration camps, he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom, right? To take a pause, and see what happens in that space. And humility, by cultivating humility in ourselves, that gives us more the capacity and the capability to step into that space. So when you feel defensive or you need to be right, push the pause button. And if you feel shame, it's really tender territory. I can tell you from my own experience, treat yourself well. Don't bully on yourself, because it's part of being human. Try not to jump to conclusions. It's really hard, because what we'll talk about in the class is our minds are wired to make shortcuts. Not only because it makes us feel better to have quick answers, but our brains are wired to conserve energy. And if we have to rethink everything, like which kind of toothpaste is better out of these 20, right? There's certain shortcuts that really work, and they're good. But when we use them too automatically, then they become maladaptive. The other thing that this has been really great for me, is developing the art of the working hypothesis. So it goes something like, from what I know up to this point, this is the conclusion I've made. I could be wrong. And I feel like I could be poised to pivot if I got new information, new insights, changed my mind. Malcolm Gladwell, somebody I really like, a writer, he said, I feel I change my mind all the time. And I sort of feel that's your responsibility as a person, as a human being, to constantly be updating your positions on as many things as possible. And if you don't contradict yourself on a regular basis, then you're not thinking. So if I'm not changing my mind regularly, I know I'm not thinking, right? It really is food for thought. Cultivating curiosity. Maybe the other person knows something I don't. Could be. And start to see when your beliefs and opinions might not be accurate, they might be outdated or not based on a fuller knowledge of the issue. And last but not least, cultivate the ability to laugh at yourself. That's the best thing. Normalize being wrong. I did the class I'm doing here, I'm doing online, and I did the first one on Saturday, and the people had an exercise and partners where they were asked to tell a time that they found out they were wrong and how they felt and that and that. So this one woman, she raises her hand at the Q&A part, and she says, she's just laughing. She says, I was in that inquiry and I couldn't think of a time I was wrong. And she said, and I still can't. And she's laughing. I thought, this is like for a teacher so great when a participant is just doing the teaching moment. It was so beautiful. And everyone was laughing. It was great. So I want to end this talk now with a short clip from a woman named Catherine Schultz. She wrote a book called Being Wrong, which I really recommend. I used that as a textbook when I taught exploring right and wrong through film at SOU. And she has a longer TED Talk that's worth watching. This is from
What's her name again?
Catherine Schultz. Okay.
Think for a moment about what it means to feel right. It means that you think that your beliefs just perfectly reflect reality. And when you feel that way, you've got a problem to solve. Which is, how are you going to explain all of those people who disagree with you? It turns out most of us explain those people the same way, by resorting to a series of unfortunate assumptions. The first thing we usually do when someone disagrees with us is we just assume they're ignorant. They don't have access to the same information that we do, and when we generously share that information with them, they're going to see the light and come on over to our team. When that doesn't work, then we move on to a second assumption, which is that they're idiots. They have all the right pieces of the puzzle, and they are too moronic to put them together correctly. And when that doesn't work, then we move on to a third assumption. They know the truth, and they are deliberately distorting it for their own malevolent purposes. This attachment to our own rightness causes us to treat each other terribly. But to me, what's most baffling and most tragic about this is that it misses the whole point of being human. The miracle of your mind isn't that you can see the world as it is. It's that you can see the world as it isn't. We can remember the past, and we can think about the future, and we can imagine what it's like to be some other person in some other place. And we all do this a little differently, which is why we can all look up at the same night sky and see this, and also this, and also this. And it is also why we get things wrong. If you really want to rediscover wonder, you need to step outside of that tiny, terrified space of rightness and look around at each other and look out at the vastness and complexity and mystery of the universe and be able to say, wow, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, there you go.